Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and we got some nuclear fallout this week. Some game devs nerfed some of the most commonly used weapons in their game, and the community went absolutely ballistic in response. This happened in Helldivers too, and things got real ugly, with some devs actually coming out and saying things to players that, man, you gotta hear it to believe it. But also in the news this week, we got the release of the gauntlet in Diablo 4. We'll talk about how that's been received with the community. Definitely everyone is happy now and loving the game, right? We'll also talk about some other stories that happened this week in the gaming industry, including last Epoch teasing some great changes coming soon. But before we dive in, just a quick word from this video's sponsor. I built my website, Rhykker.com, using Squarespace, and I was able to do everything myself, quickly and easily, and with zero education in the field, all thanks to how easy Squarespace is to work with. Watch how easily I updated the Diablo lore section on my website to include my latest lore videos. Squarespace is flexible for any kind of website, with tons of templates that you can easily customize to your needs, no knowledge of coding required. And with their new Fluid engine, it's easier than ever. You just drag and drop elements to move and resize them. You can even set up a custom merch shop with Squarespace now. You just design your products, and they handle production, inventory, shipping, all the stuff that would be a nightmare to handle on your own. Basically, if you want to build a website, I recommend Squarespace. It's the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. Stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything. Your products, content you create, or even your time. Squarespace is offering my viewers 10% off your first purchase with them. Just go to squarespace.com/Rhykker or click the link in the description to start your free trial and start building your online presence. That's squarespace.com/RHYKKER and use code Rhykker to get started today. Alright citizens, let's kick things off with some Helldivers 2 news. It's been one hell of a week on Super Earth. A patch release that nerfed the best metagear in the game. And the fallout has been, well, I guess it went about as well as expected. The patch saw a nerf to the breaker shotgun, largely considered to be the best primary weapon in the game, to the railgun, a support weapon considered essential to all high-level play, and the shield generator backpack, which is another meta item. Kind of rounded out the trifecta. Now with the patch came some dev notes written by designer Alex K, who said, quote, "This is the first round in a never-ending series of balance changes. Our goal is to give you a wide range of weapon choices, where each gun has its purpose and none is strictly better than another. Generally, we balance each item according to its quirks, so if a weapon is very effective at what it does, it should come with significant disadvantages to balance its power. Weapons that are both powerful and versatile become a no-brainer choice during the weapon selection phase. It robs you of your own agency, as stale meta builds force you to make an unfair choice between a fun weapon and an effective one. In short, powerful weapons can't be too versatile, versatile weapons can't be too powerful." Having said all that, after analyzing player feedback and the data we've collected over the past month, we found three biggest offenders of that principle: the breaker shotgun, the railgun, and the shield generator backpack. All three of those were quite strong with too little downsides, overshadowing all other options on higher difficulty levels. So with this patch, they're getting significant downsides to balance their power. However, we strongly believe that the changes won't ruin this build, but rather help the affected items find their place among the other options and stay effective in capable hands. He goes on to acknowledge that it sucks to have your favorite weapons nerfed, but he urged players to actually give the patch a try, rather than just reading the patch notes before making a judgment call. Now, this isn't the only thing that the patch did. It also added some volcanic eruptions and meteor strikes as potential exciting events that can spawn on the planets. I'm loving them. They also fixed an armor rating bug. Apparently, armor rating wasn't actually doing what it should do, so this is a buff to players. They even did some buffs to some underperforming gear. For instance, the flamethrower got a 50% damage buff. It's now actually pretty effective at killing chargers. Still though, the focus overall from the community has been on the nerfs, as they are substantial. And again, the community's been pretty much up in arms about things. And while I generally feel that player bases complain way too much about nerfs, I've always been in favor of both nerfing and buffing when it comes to balancing a game. It seems like in this particular case, there may be some merit to the complaints. In particular with the railgun, for instance. This weapon is picked not just because it's considered overpowered, but because it's the most effective gun against armored targets. At high levels of difficulty, armored targets are such a huge problem, and the railgun was considered a necessary tool for dealing with them. So while it's an admirable design goal to ensure that players should have the freedom to pick weapons based on what their favorite weapon is, rather than which weapon is considered best, when the game developers design a problem in the game for players to solve, and players feel, well, only one tool is really effective at solving this problem, it then feels bad to have that tool nerfed, because now you're just left with a bunch of ineffective tools. The core of Helldivers 2 gameplay can be boiled down to killing hordes of weak enemies and killing big armored enemies. And the devs did a great job of giving us tools to handle the hordes. You have any number of weapons that are viable for that kind of gameplay. And they gave us tools to deal with the big armored enemies, but at the highest difficulties. The armored enemies come in such great numbers that most of the tools designed to take them down just aren't effective in a battlefield situation. So maybe the solution here from the devs shouldn't be to nerf the only effective tool at handling this critical situation. Maybe the solution should be rebalancing enemy composition such that you don't create a situation where the railgun is the only effective tool. Now, in fairness, not all players were opposed to the balance changes. Some were in favor of the nerfs, feeling that the shield backpack and the railgun were too strong. Some are pointing to how the flamer is the new tool now to deal with armored targets. Others are insisting that at the highest levels of play, the flamer just takes too long to kill the chargers. All that said, the degree of community anger was completely unwarranted, especially towards a team that up to that point had done a fantastic job. The situation became so heated, things got to a point where devs started actually fighting back, which, in my opinion, was a mistake. One dev went on to say, people are still clearing Helldive, so I'm not sure what to say here, but skill issue comes to mind. Basically suggesting that, with the current state of the game, if you can no longer clear the content, you suck. He posted a lot on Reddit with various replies, justifications of things. Not all the messages were inflammatory, but he would slip in little things like this that were inflammatory, like, I do like stoking the flames of nerd rage a little here and there. More suggestions that players are just playing wrong and need to get better. And again, I'm feeding the rage a little for my own entertainment here, just so you know. We made two of the most brainless playstyles less viable, effectively insulting how some players choose to play the game, which is also a playstyle that the game itself was designed to permit. It wasn't only your comment that got me trolling. I stand by what I said. If you can't make it work where other people can, then that will be the definition of a skill issue. I went a little far with the trolling, but what I said is said. I'm sorry if people took offense to it. I'm not going to engage with the community anymore. Since as many people have pointed out, we have a community team that should handle that. I figured I'd have a little fun with the players, but I realized being a dev, I'm in an unfair position. Maybe this isn't going to mend anything with you, but at least I feel I should own up to it and apologize. I'm sorry. Now this dev was absolutely roasted by the community. I don't think what he said was all that bad, but it's kind of a read the room situation. People are upset, there's a beehive, and he went to poke it. And then the multiple admissions that he's basically trolling players, telling them to get good at the game, that they're just bad. It's not what the upset people want to hear right now, and it's just pouring gasoline onto a fire. Is it somewhat therapeutic for him? Yeah, I'm sure a lot of devs from a lot of companies hearing this story want to go high-five this guy. But then we also had a dev post in the Discord. I think once the dust settles, the parts of the community that enjoyed dev interaction up to this point might be in for some disappointing times. And that same dev later replied, and I'm out of here, get good, play easiest if you want to win, send in a ticket and complain, and HR might have a meeting with me. And then this guy left the Discord server. Even one of the moderators on the official Helldivers Discord said the following, man, watching you all cry amuses me so much. So things got to a point where the game director himself stepped in with the following messages. Yeah, this is a horrible statement and not representing or following the studio guidelines in how to communicate. It is emotionally driven, and the critiques of the balance patch were taken as a personal attack. I am extremely disappointed with the behavior. Elsewhere, he said, we are aware of this and have taken action internally to educate our developers on how to represent the organization. This is not a message that the studio stands behind. We are always working to make as an enjoyable experience and community that we can. We are taking your feedback and improving based on it. Thank you. All love. Elsewhere, he said, yes, this is inexcusable behavior and we are providing education, on how not to behave this way when representing the studio. I am speaking to the team about it. I am sorry if we came off as arrogant. It is not acceptable, and we will do better. The game director has remained consistently professional in his messaging with the community since the game's launch. He seems like a great captain at the helm of the ship, and maybe, at least for the time being, he should be the one communicating to the community. Even though he expressed as part of his leadership style, he encouraged devs to go out and communicate. But there's a reason that at AAA studios, pretty much anyone who is talking to the public or has been allowed to talk to the public has undergone some kind of PR training. Look, at the end of the day, it is totally understandable for devs to be pissed off at players. They're human beings. They're allowed to have emotions. They're allowed to get angry. Players say the absolute most vile, disgusting, horrible things to devs, and it's completely unwarranted. But here's the thing. As a dev, if you get down in the mud with some of them, and some of these people literally are children, you gotta remember you're not just representing yourself, you're representing your whole team. Whether you like it or not, your words and your behavior will reflect on your team as a whole. Because the community, they're not going to see you as an individual. They're going to say, look at what the devs, the collective dev team, look at what Arrowhead, look at what they're saying to us. The game director did great damage control in this case, but if this continues to happen, then it's going to reflect poorly on him as well. But I think overall, this just goes to show that the Arrowhead devs, they're a small team that neither expected their game to blow up as it has, nor were they prepared for this level of success and the unfortunate side of what comes with that success. Now, to perhaps bring some resolution to the whole situation, the team came out with an update saying that they have some rebalances on the way for heavy armored mobs. They're looking to adjust their spawn rates and also their health pools so that they're easier to take down and also to prevent them from just occurring in large spikes all at once. We don't have any date yet on when that's going to roll out, but I imagine it won't be too long. Meanwhile, the devs have been teasing wearable mech suits coming to the game, stating that they're in production in the factories at Tianquan and will be deployed to the battlefield soon. And then, suddenly this week, there was an attack on Tianquan, and players received a new major order to liberate the planet. Automatons were threatening the exosuit factories, and as of this recording, the planet has yet to be liberated. It's probably going to be liberated by the time this video goes live, and I'm willing to bet that once the community succeeds on this goal, we're going to get our mech suits. And yep, the planet was liberated, democracy was spread, and the exosuits have entered the game. We also got a trailer for an upcoming premium war bond that releases March 14th, which will include explosive weapons, prototype armor, as well as cosmetics, of course. And so far, the devs have done a good job at ensuring that nothing in the premium battle pass is better than what you can get for free. I'll also specify, though, that you can earn premium currency in the game just by playing the game. But again, it's still hopefully true that nothing premium will be better or best. I'm a little concerned, though, just because they're bringing back the sickle from Helldivers 1. And if I remember correctly, in Helldivers 1, the sickle was a really good weapon. Now I'm going to wrap up this section by mentioning that Helldivers 2 sales went up yet again this week, which is incredible. The normal trend for a game is sales are strongest in the first week and then they drop over time at some rate. Helldivers sales are just climbing continuously, and I do wonder how much of this was impacted by the game having server issues at launch that are largely resolved now. I know I was finally convinced to give the game a try this week, knowing that, okay, server issues are done, and a lot of people seem to be enjoying it. A lot of people are trying to convince me to try it out, and I'm glad I did. I'm liking the game a lot. But honestly, even if I hadn't enjoyed the game, even if I decided this game wasn't for me, because that was a gamble, I wasn't really sure if it would be my type of game, I still would have been happy to spend the money to support a small dev team that runs a fair business model, and you know, they seem to be making a game that makes a lot of people happy. So I did my part for democracy. And I think part of what makes this game so fun for me is the combination of the chaotic, frenetic action, just how crazy things can get. It's almost like channeling some Lethal Company energy, and also how immersive it is with the giant explosions going off and the music and the lore and just everything. But what about you folks? Are you still enjoying Helldivers 2 even post nerf after the patch? Sign off in the comments with what you like or don't like about the game. Moving on to some last Epoch news. We got patch 1.02 this week, which includes a number of fixes plus a couple of balance changes. Of note, the sell prices for arena keys has been gutted. It's now selling for about 1/30th of the gold they previously were selling for. And this is significant because Circle of Fortune players were farming these keys as a means of earning gold. Merchant Guild players can earn gold a lot more easily by selling items on the bazaar. And well, you can argue, well, they need more gold because they gotta buy items from the bazaar. And while that is true, stash tabs get increasingly expensive. When it's costing you like $500,000 to buy your next stash tab, it almost seems like the most viable gold farming strategy at this point is now to make a Merchant's Guild character and farm gold on a separate character. However, we almost immediately got some good news. In a patch next week, we can expect stash tabs to decrease in price by about 50% or more. We also heard from gaming director Judd that the team has active plans to make getting to empowered monoliths for your alt characters significantly faster, which has been a pain point for some in the community, so that's great to hear. Then in some Diablo 4 news, this week we saw the launch of the Gauntlet, and the player base has gone mild. In general, I'm not seeing a lot of excitement for this feature. On the contrary, I'm seeing a good amount of disappointment, which is not aided by the fact that a lot of people have been eagerly anticipating leaderboards since release, and now, 9 months later, it feels like a lackluster addition to the game by many. The timing of the release certainly doesn't help. We're in a dead part of the season where the bulk of the player base has moved on and they're just waiting for Season 4. And with Last Epoch having recently released, a lot of people they'd just rather play that. There are some people that do seem to enjoy the Gauntlet, but overall this isn't the big win for the game that many had hoped for. On a personal note, I'm not a competitive player. I was never going to care about a leaderboard activity. That's just not content that's made for me. Right now, the Gauntlet exists in a space that Diablo 3 Challenge Rifts did. It's something I'll do once a week to get the reward, and that's it. I do think it's a positive addition to the game. It's something new. It's different gameplay. It's not a nightmare dungeon. You're doing different stuff in a game that, I mean, ultimately, like, what else are you going to do in a Diablo game other than go around and kill monsters? So it's a little bit different, but I don't think I'm going to be spending much time on it. And yeah, I would have rather that dev effort would have been put towards something else, like more endgame content. Maybe some kind of roguelike dungeon with multiple levels, and you pick up powers each time you descend a level, and the difficulty increases. Maybe that's something that can be both a new endgame activity and a fun activity that could have a leaderboard tied to it as well. I think the most positive part of the addition of the Gauntlet is something that maybe I'm reading too much into, or maybe it's something that the community is sleeping on, is that the way things are set up, they've added a trials section. The Gauntlet is part of the trials, and at first I thought, well, this is just like silly jargon, like why do we have two different terms for the same thing? But it almost is set up like, okay, in the trials section, you have the Gauntlet, but you could also have other stuff added in the future. Like this is the whole leaderboard section, and the Gauntlet will just be one of these activities. If that's the case, then that's pretty promising. Who knows? I will say my biggest complaint about the Gauntlet is with the leaderboards. Currently, you can inspect the profiles of players on the leaderboards. However, players have the option to set their profiles to private, and there's no way to distinguish a private profile from a public profile until you right-click and inspect, and the thing loads and then says, this profile is private. So now you have to play this frustrating guessing game as you're trying to inspect people on leaderboards and just getting private, 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 public, private, 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 public. It's just a bad user experience. I say either make all the profiles public or make them all private. Right now, it's just frustrating. Either that or have a little flag display immediately so that I don't waste time and effort right-clicking and inspecting, so that I can just see right away, okay, that's a private profile, I'm not going to bother clicking on it. Even at that rate though, like as of day one, we already had so many of the top clears being turned to private that once you start fostering this atmosphere of hiding your profile, more and more people are going to do that, to the point that, again, you're barely going to see any public profiles. So we're basically once again at a point of like, well, what's the point in even giving people the option? In other news, in a follow-up to a story from last week with Nintendo taking legal action against the Nintendo Switch emulator known as Yuzu, well, the developers, Tropic Haze, responded to this threat by hiring lawyers. And once they got their lawyers on board ready to fight, they immediately settled out of court, giving Nintendo everything they asked for, $2.4 million and the complete shutdown of Yuzu. The $2.4 million is far more than Yuzu earned through Patreon over the years, if my math is right, and I imagine most, if not all of that, is going to go unpaid. Tropic Haze as a company will be forced to pay out whatever it can, then they'll likely declare bankruptcy and shut down, and the individual devs are not going to be held legally responsible to pay out the rest. But the fact that we saw such a rapid turnaround, that Tropic Haze folded so fast, their lawyers must have assured them that they had no chance fighting this, and that they were getting off easy, and they probably just told them to comply with everything. Since then, Yuzu's website has gone down, their GitHub repository has gone down. They made an official post on their Discord that really felt like it was written by their lawyers. It said, quote, "We write today to inform you that Yuzu and Yuzu's support of Citra are being discontinued effective immediately. We see now that because our projects can circumvent Nintendo's technological protection measures and allow users to play games outside of authorized hardware, they have led to extensive piracy. In particular, we have been deeply disappointed when users have used our software to leak game content prior to its release and ruin the experience for legitimate purchasers and fans. We have come to the decision that we cannot continue to allow this to occur. Effective today, we are pulling our code repositories offline, discontinuing our Patreon accounts and Discord servers, and soon shutting down our websites." And for those unaware, Citra is a 3DS emulator. It's possibly the only 3DS emulator out there. It even has some multiplayer servers and everything. So this effectively kills the 3DS emulator scene completely, and it's also a huge blow to the Nintendo Switch emulator scene, of course. The fact that this was settled out of court, however, means that no legal precedent was set for other cases involving emulators. But again, making emulators is hard, it requires a lot of work, a lot of know-how, and it would take a lot of balls to try to make any money off a Nintendo emulator again after this. I'll also clarify a statement I made last week. Technically, you don't have to pay for Yuzu. However, if you were a Patreon supporter, then you would get access to the early access version of Yuzu, getting its most up-to-date upcoming features. That said, it seemed like most people who actually paid for Yuzu did so more so to support the developers than to get access to that. So where does that leave us today? Well, while Yuzu is officially gone, it was an open source project, meaning even though the GitHub is no longer up, there are plenty of people who already have the code and they'll be able to disseminate it. Tropic Haze was legally forbidden from offering or marketing Yuzu or any of its source code in the future, but no one else is under this legal obligation. And I expect determined people will still be able to find Yuzu, and some individuals may even take it upon themselves to maintain Yuzu's code, but without the financial backing, things will never be the same, and Yuzu, as it has been known, is dead. In other news, in a previous video, we reported on Respawn having a Star Wars FPS in the works that was cancelled amidst a round of layoffs. Well, BitReactor, an indie studio that is co-developing a Star Wars RTS title with Respawn, has confirmed that their game was unaffected by the layoffs. This is a little bizarre. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy for them, and I'm happy that we're getting a Star Wars RTS. It just seems weird that Respawn, a studio known for banging out great FPS titles, has their FPS cancelled, and an RTS, a genre that isn't exactly at the peak of its popularity, is not being cancelled. If I had to guess, it's likely a budget issue. The FPS probably cost significantly more to produce. Maybe the RTS was even further along in development at this point. Who knows? BitReactor's a new studio. They don't have any games under their belt yet, but they were built to make RTS games, and the talent within BitReactor, they worked on XCOM, they worked on Civilization, so I'm optimistic about this game. And that's going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to check out last week's video in which we discussed why the developers of Helldivers 2 are so devious. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Special thanks to my supporters, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more gaming content.